Okay. All right, so we're going to get started. Before we get started, though, Joshua Sanders, would you mind leading us in a word of prayer? Thank you.
Lord, we thank you for today with us, for all that we use for your sites. Lord, help us to focus on this lesson, Lord. Help us to understand how your spirit works, how it has worked throughout the biblical narrative, and what we can learn from it and apply to our lives. Forgive us when we sin against thee, and you send your son died on the cross.
Amen. All right. Let's go and turn our Old Testaments to Exodus chapter 19. Exodus chapter 19. Did Eric call in sick? Oh, just didn't want to come in my class today. I know Florida plays at 12:15, but he'll make it. So, all right, Exodus 19. So after God has delivered his people out of Egypt, he brings them to Mount Sinai. And there we have the well-known text in verses 4 through 6. You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you'll indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. We know those words. This is God talking about how he had been gracious to Israel, delivered them, bore them on eagle's wings, and how his grace would continue to be with them if they were in covenant with him, if they would follow him and keep his commandments. So that's the good news. But then someone take for us, starting in verse 10, and read 10 through 12 of the same chapter. Exodus 19, starting in verse 10. Ryan, go ahead.
Then the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai and the sight of all the people. You shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, take heed to yourselves that you do not go up to the mountain or touch its base. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death.
What do you take from that? That's quite a stark juxtaposition. Here's God saying, okay, I want you to be my special people. You're going to be a blessed people. I'm going to be your God. You're going to be my people. And then God says, well, I'm coming down the mountain, and if you touch it, you'll die. So no matter how blessed these people were, they were not yet ready for the presence of God among them. Okay? They could not be on the mountain, touch the mountain where God was going to be. Well, Exodus 20 through 24 are a pretty significant passage in the Old Testament. So we have the 10 Commandments that are given in chapter 20. And really, when we're looking at a covenant, and we've talked about covenant some, a covenant is an agreement with God, it's a binding agreement with God. And it's something that all should want to be in, because here is God, the giver of all good things, and he is willing to bind himself to us. So God entering a covenant with Israel, God entering a covenant with us, is God saying, all that I say to you, I'm going to do if we're in covenant with each other. And of course, that's where law or commandments come in. How is it that we can be in covenant with God? Well, certainly it's because he's gracious, but we have to follow his stipulations to be in covenant. Those 10 commandments, you might say, are kind of a prelude to the covenant overall. Here are the 10 basics, if you will, of what it's going to take to be in covenant relationship with God. So the 10 commandments are given in chapter 20. Other regulations are given in the chapters that follow. But then you come to chapter 24. Okay? So chapter 24, Moses takes the elders, the leaders of the people, and they go to Sinai and they offer sacrifices, verse 5. Even before that, in verse 3, Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the rules, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words that the Lord has spoken we will do. Sacrifices are made, an altar is built, And the blood of that sacrifice, some of it is taken and sprinkled on the altar, and the rest is sprinkled on the people. A covenant is ratified by blood. So here is Israel entering into this covenant with God. They have sworn fealty. They have sworn everything that God commands we're going to do. And now God enters into a covenant with them through blood. And so it's significant. In the immediate chapter after that, when we get to chapter 25, you read in verse 8, let them make a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst. And the rest of Exodus, almost entirely, is about that sanctuary. It is first the giving of the commandments or the giving of the specifications of how that sanctuary is to be made. And then you're going to read the building of that sanctuary. And you might wonder why are so many chapters given to first, here's the regulations, and then here's how they did it. And the whole point is, this is what it's going to take for God to dwell among his people. God's just not going to come down and just dwell with them. No, this is what it takes for God to dwell among his people. So that's why today, primarily, we are looking at the tabernacle overall. If you want relative size, by the way, the whole tabernacle, boy, words are hard. Thank you. Complex is about the fourth of a American football field. So not tiny, but not the grandest thing in the world either. But in this, we're going to find, and we're going to kind of go through and just look at what it says about the tabernacle, and then we're going to have a discussion. I would like to hear from you. What do you think this is all implying about God's presence among his people? So we're going to look at that, and then we'll discuss that. So beginning in chapter 25, you read about the contribution. Remember, when they left Egypt, did they leave Egypt empty-handed? No. What did they ask the people? Yeah, just they asked the Egyptians, "Hey, give us what you want," and they, the Egyptians gave them gold and all these wonderful things. Well, there's a purpose behind that. God wasn't just looking at enriching his people. No, now there's to be a contribution of all these precious things from the people, and significantly, how were they to give? Generously and freely, voluntarily, and come on, there's something we talk about every Sunday. What? Cheerfully? Yes. And as they purpose in their heart. Exactly. So that's probably the basis of Paul's statement there to the Corinthians, as you purpose in your heart. They knew what that meant, because that is what Israel had done in making the tabernacle. Everyone was purpose in their heart. As their heart moved them, they contributed. Okay? So we've got that. Here is this tabernacle. It's going to be built from the most costly materials, but those are contributed from the people themselves, and they do so willingly. They do so freely. We also see in the 25th chapter, so for God to dwell among his people, they're going to have to build and construct this tabernacle in a certain way. God says it's going to have to be by the exact pattern that I show you. So again, that's why there's so much elaborate detail given in chapters 25 through 31. And then you see in chapters 35 through the end of the book, they are following those specific details to the letter. All right, so let's look at some of the specific items that are in the tabernacle. Of course, this is the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, its construction is detailed in chapter 25. And what's significant about the Ark?
It will represent God's presence.
All right, how so? How does it represent God's presence?
Just everything in there was coordinated with God, correlated with God.
Okay. Anybody want to explain that further? How is it correlated with God? Yes. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point Maria makes. It's representative of so in fact, I didn't use this photo. No, hang on, I'm thinking of something else. Never mind. So the cherubim, angelic beings. What else do we know happens in between those cherubim based on the text? Look at chapter 25, and someone read for us verse 22. Chapter 25, verse 22.
There will be to you from the false atoning cover from the cherubim which are upon the ark of the testimony of
So it was there, God says, that the atoning cover, which translation is that, Aaron? New American Standard says atoning cover. ESV says mercy seat. Probably you have one of those two translations there. So, and by the way, I mean, we could just talk about the Ark of the Covenant all day. No clips of Indiana Jones, sorry. But of course, what's under the atoning cover or the mercy seat? What's in the actual ark at this point? Tablets. This is where Moses was told, all right, put the law of the covenant, okay, the stipulations that Israel's supposed to follow, that is in the ark. But then what's on top of that? Mercy. Okay, so there's built into the Ark of the Covenant the idea that my people are not going to follow my law perfectly. But there's mercy over that. There is atoning that's going to happen over that. And of course, God's presence is what is there. All right, so you've got that. And of course, where in the tabernacle itself was that ark to be placed? Yeah, in the Holy of Holies. We'll come back to that in a little bit. So that is the holiest area of the tabernacle. God's presence is to be there because God's presence would be in and on top of the mercy seat. Now, this next article, there's some debate actually on where it was placed because of the wording. There are some who think it was actually in the Holy of Holies. It seems most likely it was not in the holy place. But the next item that we want to talk about is this table. And this is the table of showbread. Now, of course, the answer's already there. What do you put on top of this table? Okay, you put the showbread. How many loaves of showbread were there? All right, there's 12. Ross, turn over to Leviticus 24 and read verses 5 through 8 for us. Leviticus 24 and read for us verses 5 through 8.
Then you shall take fine flour and bake 12 cakes. 2/5 of an ephah shall be in each cake. You shall set them in 2 rows, 6 to a row, on a pure gold table before God. You shall put pure frankincense on each row, that it may be a memorial for the bread, even an offering by fire to God. Every Sabbath day you shall set it in order before Yahweh continually. It is an everlasting covenant for the sons of Israel.
What does that bread represent? You've got 12 loaves. That is a covenant from Israel. So here in the tabernacle, while yes, it is God's presence among his people, in the tabernacle itself, you have renewed every day the idea of the presence of God's people. They are represented in the loaves, the 12 loaves that are there. Okay. Outside of the tabernacle, we have this. And the specifications given for, hang on, I think I skipped something. Yeah, I did. So let's talk about this first. Let's talk about the tabernacle itself. What do we call the tabernacle? What does that mean? Okay, it's a tent. What's that tent constructed of? That's all in chapter 26, by the way. We're not going to take the time. Do what? Fabric boards. Okay. What are the tent the curtains on the actual tabernacle, what are they supposed to look like? The inside. Okay, so you've got purple and gold fabric that are used, and then cherubim are somehow woven into that. So you've got this really splendid, look. But what's the purpose of the tent itself? There's still that tent is a separation. And Maria's point even of you've got an inner and you got an outer cover. That outer cover doesn't look nearly as splendid as the inner cover does. Now granted, there may have been some practical things about that. We're going to cover it with a rather plain leather cover to protect it from the elements. But still, there's that idea. You're the people. You don't get to see inside. You don't get to see all the grandeur inside. You see the tent, but in that tent is where God's presence is supposed to be. And of course, the tabernacle itself was segmented, right? We've already talked about it. We've got the Holy of Holies that Aaron and the high priest would go into once a year. And then the priest would go into the holy place. They would go in there and minister daily. But there's still in the tabernacle itself this idea of separation. Yes, God is with us, God is among us, but for Israel's standpoint, they could not yet be in that kind of presence of God, right? Now, outside of the tabernacle itself, and by the way, this is the outer, I guess curtains we would say, that was also specified in chapter 26. So this you see on the outer side, that's specified as well. And that itself would be a barrier. And what Israel did with that is, foreigners were not supposed to go in that. Only Israel, only those making their sacrifices would go in. So there's still another area or layer of separation between God's presence and the people at large. Now, chapter 27 specifies this, the altar, okay, the bronze altar. Doesn't go into what it was going to be used for in Exodus, but of course, if we read the beginning chapters of Leviticus, what would that altar be used for? What kind of offerings would be made? Burnt offerings, okay. What would those burnt offerings be used for? You've got different kinds of offerings that are specified in Leviticus. So some are for guilt or for sin. Peace offerings, free will offerings. So all these different offerings. And by the way, how many altars were supposed to exist in Israel? One altar. Okay, you weren't supposed to have them on the high places. You weren't supposed to have your own personal altar. This is the altar where every sacrifice in Israel is supposed to be made. And those sacrifices were what would atone for sin, forgive sin, make peace between God, show dedication to God. So again, right here on the outside, you've got this altar that is going to help keep Israel in fellowship with God. Because again, they're not going to keep the law perfectly. They're not going to be holy on their own merit. So they have to make sacrifices in order for God's presence to be with them. Chapters 28 and 29 go into Aaron and his sons and the priesthood that was supposed to exist and how they are consecrated. What's interesting about the garments that Aaron in particular would wear? So you look at the garment, what do you have an association with once you look at the garment? Don't look at the hat.
Same colors as the curtains.
Okay. So right there, God is saying in the giving of the garment itself, this person, this figure is associated with me because he's going to wear my colors. It's like Tommy in orange. Like we know who Tommy's representing. All right. The color scheme is important. the high priest looks like the tabernacle. But what else does the high priest wear? Let's look at just a couple of verses here. Let's go to 28, and let's look at 9 through 12. So I'm going to read first verses 9 through 12. You want it? Sure, go ahead. Yes, sir.
Then you shall take 2 onyx stones and engrave on them the names of the sons of Israel. 6 of the names on one stone and 6 names on the other stone, in order of their birth. With the work of an engraver in the stone, as the engraving of a signet. You shall engrave the 2 stones with the names of the sons of Israel. You shall set them in settings of gold. You shall put the 2 stones on the shoulders of the ephod as memorial stones for the sons of Israel. So Aaron shall bear the names before the Lord on his 2 shoulders as a memorial.
All right. Then you skip down to verse 21, and this is talking about the breastpiece that the high priest is supposed to wear, and the various stones that would be on that breastpiece. And it says in verse 21, there shall be 12 stones with their names according to the names of the sons of Israel. They will be like signets, each engraved with its name for the 12 tribes. So what is significant about this high priest? Wearing the colors of God, but what else is he wearing? Wearing the names of the people. On both his shoulders and on the breastplate, he is wearing the names of the people. That's an invitation or something right there, just talking about Jesus as high priest. And of course, but you've got that in the Old Testament high priest, representing both the people and God in one figure. Right? So that's not all of it. This priest and his sons had to be consecrated, and there was a whole process. That's the one with the right thumb and the right big toe and the earlobe, and the blood's being applied to those things. The idea that this figure, not just the high priest, but all of the priests, are dedicated to the service of God, to the work of God in the temple in serving the people. All right. Couple of other things. So there's another article that is also on the outside, and that is this bronze basin, which is between the altar and the entrance of the tabernacle. And what's significant about the bronze basin? What was it used for? Purifying. How so? So for the priest to go in to the temple, any priest, you had to wash your hands and your feet. You had to go in with clean hands, clean feet to be able to serve before God. There was a washing that occurred every time. By the way, that's probably at the heart of baptism when you get to, not just because God gives commands, but there were a lot of people baptizing already before John even got on the scene. I remember Brother Jenkins was with us a couple of years ago. He had a lot of pictures of one thing. You remember what they were called? Make an impression on some of you. There's a lot of pictures about mikvahs. Okay, these were these baptismal pools that were pretty frequent, pretty common in Palestine in the days of Rome leading up to the days of Christ. Well, that's because the Pharisees and other groups had really taken this idea of, well, the priests are supposed to be clean to serve before God. So therefore, we should all be cleansed. We should all be washed. And so baptism has kind of taken on a significance even before John the Baptist comes. And now he's baptizing, but for different reasons. He's saying this isn't for getting rid of defilement from your flesh. No, this is to remove sin. And then, of course, Jesus and the apostles take off on that. But that all goes back really to this basin where the priest would always wash. They would wash their hands. They would wash their feet. All right. There was also an oil that was to be made, a special oil. And with that oil, everything was consecrated. Every last piece of furniture in the tabernacle was consecrated. Aaron and his sons were consecrated as well. And in fact, God said, you aren't supposed to even make this oil for yourself. This is an oil only for my house. This consecrates my house. It's going to consecrate my people. And then the final thing is, and I'm going to let Ross cook here in just a second. So you have this really fascinating detail given in both the instructions and then in chapter 35, when you start reading about how the tabernacle is going to be constructed. And God says in Exodus 31 and verse 1, see, I have called by name Bezalel. I may not pronounce it correctly, but we all know my struggles with that. The son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, and bronze, and cutting stones for settings, and carving wood, to work in every craft. And behold, I have appointed with him Aholiab, the son of Asamach, of the tribe of Dan, and I have given to all able men ability that they may make all that I've commanded you. And that same thing is more or less said in chapter 35 when we read about how they were going to then construct the tabernacle. But the significant point is God says, the one who's going to make the tabernacle, I have filled him with my Spirit. So the very building that's to be built so that God can dwell there is built by someone whose God's Spirit inhabits. Go ahead.
Sure, thanks. I just love Bezalel. I'm talking about him because he's such. I've talked about this before. He is like such a type of Christ. He's such a foreshadowing of Christ because he's from the tribe of Judah. He's a craftsman. Like Jesus was a carpenter. This guy's a craftsman. And then, like, what does it sound like? But he's filled with the Spirit of God and wisdom and understanding and knowledge. Like that sounds like he grew in wisdom and stature and in favor among God and man. And like I said, he's from the tribe of Judah, and he is the first person in the Bible who is like said, at least by God, to be filled with God's Spirit. It's like we talked about Joseph a couple of weeks ago, and that was Pharaoh saying like a spirit of either God or the gods, or that like this. We don't know what Pharaoh knew, but this is literally from like now Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, like, I've placed my Spirit in him. And he's building the dwelling place of God on earth. It's like it's so Jesus, because Jesus was filled with God's Spirit. He was God. He built God's dwelling place on earth. Like he was the place of God on earth, but he also is building all of us into the dwelling place of God. Bezalel even knew apparently what cherubim looked like because he was able to weave, or at least instruct the other weavers how to do it and everything. Anyway, he's just such a fascinating guy, and especially in relation to the Spirit, because this is God setting up how his Spirit is going to be flowing. Yeah. And to do it, like you said, he put his own Spirit inside him. And just like, again, he's a foreshadow of Jesus, and also think about us, like how we should use our talents, our wisdom, our all kinds of craftsmanship, whatever that is. We're filled with God's Spirit. Go do more work. That's how we bring God's presence into the world.
Then, well said. Tell you what came to my mind when I first read this is like, yeah, this makes sense, because this tabernacle is going to have to be perfect. And I don't know that we can appreciate how perfect the construction would be. Even just think of the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, when you've got these two cherubim. Can you imagine in those days how difficult it would be to make cherubim one and to make two exact replicas? If it were us, it'd be like one of those nailed it photos you find online. It's like, well, it's supposed to be this, and here's what it is. It didn't look right. But no, this is going to look perfect. This is going to look exactly how God wants it to be. Just imagine you're trying to make something, you're trying to get it exactly level. And it's like, oh, I got it 1 degree off. There's no degrees off here. It's going to be perfect because God filled him with his spirit. God gave him the ability. He didn't leave it to chance. All right, so here's what I want you to just think about. Here you are, you're Israel. And you've been told by God, you've seen God's presence come down the mountain. Remember, what was Israel's response to that? We don't want God to talk to us anymore. We can't handle this. Moses, you go and you talk to God. We can't handle this anymore. So they know just how awesome and terrifying that is. And they've been told by God, don't even touch my mountain for your dead God. But we're going to enter into a covenant with God. We're going to willingly say we're going to do everything that God says. And now God says, all right, I want to dwell among you, and here's what it's going to take. You go through this whole process of tabernacle, priesthood, consecration, anointing. What do you think about the tabernacle? What would come to your mind, your impression of that building, of that structure? Okay. It's amazing importance.
It's temporary.
Okay. It's temporary. I think God's certainly making that point, if Israel understood it or not. What else?
Still really separate.
So that, of course, we're going to get to that when we get to the New Testament, all this means. It is a foreshadowing. This is, God's presence was among his people, but there was still a separation between God and his people, a separation that's not supposed to exist now. What else?
It also shows because of the process of dealing with God, so it shows probably gave them a lot more reverence for God. In fact, you can't just come to God any way you want to.
This, if nothing else, Israel should have been impressed by God's spirit with us. This isn't a flippant matter. This isn't something we can just take lightly. Which, by the way, when we have discussions about the spirit and what it means for God to dwell with us, we shouldn't take it lightly either. It's not a flippant thing to say God is with us. The whole history of God in Scripture should say, no, this is of reverence. For God to be with you takes costly materials. It takes sacrifice. It takes one to represent God and the people. It takes all these things. It takes a cleansing. All of this for God to be with you.
Well, I was going to say reverence, because if they were scared to have God speak to them, and this is where God was, to come anywhere close to that had to be fearful, frightened, reverence. And know this is where that God that spoke to me that I don't like, that I'm scared of, that's where he is.
Yeah, Ross.
Also, like the magnificent transformative power of God's presence being. So like they've been, in Egypt and they've been wandering and all that kind of thing, and yet like God is making this way for this presence to be. And I just think about like it's such a moment of triumph for the people. Like it says over and over again, like all the work of the tabernacle was completed. The sons of Israel did according to all that the Lord had commanded them. So they did. Like they had done it just as the Lord commanded. Like it was such a moment of triumph, but knowing in light of what's about to come throughout the rest of the Bible, like man, they actually did it. And it was like God's presence among them. You think about like Bezalel, like how amazing he got to be inside the tabernacle, which only priests did after that. Like look at the amazing things that can happen when God's presence is among them, God's spirit is well with them. And so like the amazing gratitude and everything that hope that they had, it seemed like they actually did all the like triumph and success of the moment and the gratitude that would come with that. And then it's so unfortunate that you see the failures after.
Yes. Well, not even that. So hold that thought. Was there a hand back here too, Carrie?
I was just going to say, I don't want to take the way that sounds, but it is quite constructed, but it is man-made. And where today, we're the temple, and our reward is
The Hebrew writer puts it, this was a type of course, what is the true temple or tabernacle that is in heaven, which the Hebrew writer is also saying, even though we may be here on earth, yet we are still in that tabernacle as well because our high priest is there. So all that. Yes.
And I think that's how much more does God deserve than just, it sounds grand and it is in like human terms in our understanding, but God desired to be with his people so much that he gave them something attainable that all of them. So I think it shows so much about God and his desire to be with his people, to give them something, to figure out a way for his people united with him. And like Ross was saying, how wonderful they were able to accomplish that and everything he said. And I think in reading this, like how detailed God is about everything he wants just a certain way, like he deserves so much more than that, and so there's so much more grand. But I think I'm just saying God wanting to be with his people, figure out a way, even in just this time.
Yeah. All right, so I agree with all of that. But the very next chapter, so again, this is the interesting thing about Exodus. 25 through 31, God saying, here's how I want my dwelling place to be constructed. Here's all the instructions. And then what happens in chapter 32? Okay. Moses comes down, he's got the 2 tablets. What does he do with the 2 tablets? Right, breaks them. That's not just Moses having a fit. That's Moses saying, all right, the covenant's broken. We've already broken the covenant. And what does God say he's going to do as a consequence? Look at chapter 33. And I'm going to start reading in verse 1. He says to Moses, depart, go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt to the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your offspring I will give it. I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey. But I will not go up among you, lest I consume you on the way, for you are stiff-necked people. And the significant thing about that is, I think it's also God saying, not just that I'm not going to be with you in the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud. No, that tabernacle that I just gave you the instructions for, we're done with it. You don't need that anymore because I'm not even going to go with you. Hasn't been constructed. All Moses received are the details about how to make it. We haven't made it yet. And God says we don't need to make that because I can't be with you. My presence cannot be with you. And of course, Moses then intercedes for the people, and God relents, and God says his presence will go with them. And so then you get to chapter 35. And of course, starting in chapter 35, you have the details about the construction of the tabernacle. And then those final statements or final words in verses 34 and 35 of chapter 40. The cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And so God's presence was going to go with the people. The tabernacle could be taken down, moved wherever they went. It's going to be with them even though they wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And then significantly, when they make their way to the promised land, what is it that crosses the Jordan River first or goes into the Jordan River first? The Ark of the Covenant. God's presence, symbolized by the Ark of the Covenant, goes first. God brings them over. What is it that marches around the city of Jericho before they take the city of Jericho? The Ark of the Covenant. Ark of the Covenant with the people, but it's God who's giving them all of this. So that tabernacle, that's everything, or should be everything to the people. That's where God is. God is with us. And we should keep his covenant. We should keep his word. Remember our last lesson, God guides his people through the Spirit. God guides his people through the word. We should keep that word so that God's presence, his Spirit, remains with us. So Wednesday night, we're going to talk more briefly about the temple. the temple, even though a much more glorious structure, the details about the construction of it, are not as important to God. I think you can say that. You just look at the text, even though all the preparations are made, God's not the one saying, this exactly this way, this exactly. He does that with the tabernacle, not necessarily the temple. But then we're going to look at, as Ross was talking about, the continued history of Israel departing from the covenant, breaking the covenant, and what is that going to mean for God's presence with his people. So again, we're still firmly in just the historical section of God's Spirit, his presence with the people. We've got a little bit more to cover in the Old Testament before we get to the New Testament. Any questions, comments as we wrap up, Maria?
I think that God is his own. Other things starts the entire Bible, not giving anyone, but instead it's I think that if he's not within his teaching. I can't help but think,
There's a couple of images. So Paul even uses that idea of the apostles and prophets built the foundation. Then we're all building on the house. He talks about how some are building with precious materials, some are building with straw and stubble. We may get into some of that. Then, of course, the other images that are used in the New Testament, body. Every part of the body is supposed to contribute for the benefit of the whole. So, every last bit that we talked about today has some pretty significant New Testament parallels. I don't know if we're going to have time to go into every parallel and what that means for us in our future classes, but they're there. I mean, you can draw them pretty easily. All right. Yes, Josh.
I was going to say, in chapter 33 of Exodus, whenever God is telling Moses that he's going to, I think the phrasing is very interesting at the very beginning, where he says, "Depart, go from here, you and your people who you have brought up." And so I think it seems like I was saying, like, not only am I not going to be with you anymore, but even like the history of me being with you, the history of me being with you, I'm completely dissociated.
That's interesting. Yeah, because in 19, God makes the point, I brought you, I bore you on eagle's wings, and in 33, you brought them up. That's an interesting point. Very good. Yes.
And to make that, Moses understands the importance of God's Spirit. In 16, he says, "Is it not by your going with us, so that we, I, and the people may be distinguished from all the other people who are on the face of the earth?" It's like, it's not all the rest of it. Like, it really isn't the tabernacle itself.
Not the tabernacle, not the fact we have the law, the 10 Commandments. No, it's God's presence that distinguishes us.
And then it even heightens it for us today that we have God's Spirit flowing in us. So it's not like it diminishes the importance of the tabernacle or the people or something, but it heightens the craziness that Jesus, as our high priest, has allowed us to have the presence of God.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. We will continue, Lord willing, on Wednesday.